Welcome to another episode of the Chronic Comeback Podcast. Today, I'm really happy and excited to have on the show Alexandra Marynczak. Did I get that?
Yes.
I
That is
reckon I was
correct.
95% there.
You did very well.
Thank you. Now, just to give you a little bit of an introduction to Alexandra's story and how I came across her actually originally. I first came across Alexandra's story on Instagram when she posted a video detailing her story being chronically ill and bedbound throughout most of her 20s to fully recovering and now actually helping others do the same. And I knew at that moment I had to have her on the show. When you can see what she came from to how she is today, I knew that would be so inspiring to everyone who was listening, and I knew I needed to get her on. For me, her story shows that no matter what state you're in or how hopeless seem to be, there's always a way out, and there's always light at the end of the tunnel. And so I'm so excited happy to have her on the show to share with you guys. How are you doing?
Hello. I'm doing so good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, well, we were just saying before we started recording. So you're in Hawaii, Maui at the moment. I'm in Bali. So yeah, we've escaped our cold. Vancouver's pretty cold, right?
It's cold and gray. Yeah,
Yeah.
like 90% of the time.
Yeah. So we both just said, screw this. I'm escaping the UK. I'm going to Bali. You're in Hawaii. Cool. Well, look, if you could, I alluded to a small part of your story at the beginning, but could you go back before you started to have any symptoms, assuming there was a before time?
Yeah.
How was life like before then? How was your health like before then? And then maybe if you could take us in to the beginning part of when you start to see symptoms and you notice your health
hmm
start to decline.
hmm So growing up in childhood, I had like minor things here or there, like some eczema, but just minor things. And it wasn't until high school, till about 14, 15 years old, that something started to feel a little wrong. But I was still very active. I was going out with my friends. I was playing sports. I was on the basketball team. I was on the volleyball team. So nothing that seriously like restricted my life, but just things where I was like, that's kind of weird. I don't feel quite right. And it started with just this feeling in my head, like very foggy, very disoriented. I remember being in like math class when I was 15 years old and having to walk out and like crying because I'm like, I just feel so off. Something's really wrong. And, as I'm sure you know, when something feels off, you go to the doctor and they're like, oh, no, you're fine. And then we go to the specialist and they're like, oh, no, you're fine too. So I kind of dealt with that on and off from like 15 to 21, right? Where no one could really tell me what was wrong. And all my lab work came back normal. And I started to think, okay, maybe this is just how people live. People just feel a little off. And I continued to live my life. I was very ambitious. I went to business school. I did internships. I go, never really rested, took on a lot on my plate and just, yeah, it was a lot. And then when I was 21, almost 22, I started working at this really high pressure internship. And I was really unhappy. It wasn't really aligned with who I am as a person, and it didn't feel like in alignment with my what I came here to do.
Mm.
And I just remember the time when I knew something was really wrong is I was on the bus coming home, and I just felt like I couldn't even stand anymore. I was like, oh my God, I feel I can't stand. I almost like collapsed, and I had to like ask someone to like, I'm feeling really dizzy. Can you please like give me this seat? And then I got home and I like did nothing, and I slept from like 5 p.m. to 5 a.m. And that was very uncharacteristic of me. Usually I go to yoga or I go, running or do cardio after work, just always keeping the momentum going. And I just felt flatlined. And the next day I went into work and it was like my brain was broken. It was really strange. Like I felt like I had the worst hangover over my life. I was so fatigued. I was like dragging my body and I was like, what is going on? I didn't understand. I had trouble speaking, trouble articulating. And I was like, I have no idea what's happening.
Mm. And so at that point, did you go straight to a doctor? Because I know you started to lose confidence in doctors by then, and or were you continuing? I know for me, I just continued going to see doctors and
Well,
continued.
that's what you do. That's what we're conditioned to do, right?
Yeah. So what? Yeah, you when it got really bad and I guess really scary because it's almost like I guess before when you're having like these not mini symptoms, but just stuff that's not quite right, you've still got your basic function, you still feel connected to society, but then when that starts getting taken away, there's a real disconnect there, and it really starts to affect you mentally. So yeah, were you still going to see doctors? What were they saying?
Yeah, I was. And I had my ex at the time, I went to the doctor and he's like, "Oh, I know, maybe you're just burnt out." And my ex at the time had a sister who had a burnout. And I talked with her and she's like, "This just sounds like you're going through a burnout."
Mm.
So that was my answer, my label at the time. I was like, "Whoa, this is really intense, but maybe I just did kind of, burn myself out and work too hard, and maybe I just need to rest and regroup." And I had so much resistance to that.
Yeah,
Right. I really had to pause my life. I had to stop my studies. I had to stop working and just rest.
yeah, and you were 21.
Yeah. Yeah.
21. I mean, God, I mean, I don't even want to do that now. And I'm 30. So,
It's not really the time you want to slow down. And
yeah,
I had so much resistance to doing so. And I'm sure we'll get into it, but I just had tied so much of my worth into achievement. And
yeah,
it's like to stop doing literally felt like I had to stop living.
yeah. And and I mean, maybe we would touch upon this later, but I'm interested because I feel like 21, most of your 20s, but and particularly actually maybe being this is more of a guy's experience, but friends just aren't they're very into their own thing. They're not really kind of they won't get at 21. All they want to do is maybe yeah they're ambitious, but they want to go out party that kind of thing, and maybe not really very understanding. How did all of this affect your relationships in your life? I know you mentioned an ex, but like also like friends and family and stuff. Did they get it?
Yeah, well, my ex was really understanding just because he saw his sister go through a burnout. So he's like, "Okay, we need to give her some space." But it was also really hard for him. Like, he would break down too because he was used to me being this go-getter and, really bubbly and upbeat. And then I was just in bed chronically, could barely speak, could barely move. He had to, we were living together at the time. And in the mornings, he'd have to like make me a peanut butter sandwich or a sandwich, put it by my bed for me to eat, and then like come back and help me again. He'd have to help me shower. Like it got um, really bad. But he was really understanding and really supportive. But the relationship couldn't sustain like itself. And I think that's a year later we broke up. I think it just created a lot of like weight and stress. But in terms of my other friendships, yeah, people just didn't really get it. They were as supportive as they could be. And I felt like my friends had a really good sense of who I was. So for me to stop, they knew something was wrong. But I think at that point, no one knew to the extent of it. Everyone's like, "Yeah, Alex has a burnout. She'll be back in 3 to 6 months."
Yeah, yeah. And what? How about your family? Because like I hear differing stories of like how people's families are, and where sometimes just telling people to like brush it off essentially, and then other times actually I've heard stories where people they have like yeah someone in their family that actually really dragged them through it. So like, how's your family?
Yeah, I've heard horror stories like that too of people's families being like, "Oh, you're fine."
Yeah,
Right? And I didn't have that with my family. They were actually telling me months prior to my collapse, "Alex, you gotta slow down.
yeah,
Like you gotta slow down. You're doing a little too much. Like we see you, but you gotta slow down." So even when I was like collapsed, like and feeling really ill, I was supposed to start a program in the Netherlands to study there after my internship. And I was like, "No, I have to go. I have to go." And both my parents were like, "Take time off."
yeah,
And were encouraging me not to go. And they were really supportive. Again, they really knew who I was, and they knew, like, sometimes I think there's this conception that people who are chronically ill, people will look at them and say, "Oh, you're lazy, just get off, your butt and start working." And my parents knew that, they knew who I was. So they knew for me just to collapse and not be able to do anything, they're like, "Whoa, something's seriously wrong."
yeah.
So they were actually very supportive. And yeah, throughout my whole illness. They really had my back, which was great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And so yeah, could you take us through so that you don't know what's going on, you're having to take a break from your internship at that point, did you kind of just
I
say,
yeah, I had like I think 3 weeks or a month to finish, and I just never went back. I just couldn't.
yeah,
Yeah. Um,
yeah, if you could take us through the next part, like how did things
sure.
yeah, progress?
Um, so I actually did not so much from my family or friends, but I did receive a lot of invalidation from the medical system, right? Especially when I first got ill. I had one doctor tell me I was just so depressed that I needed to work out until I just couldn't work out anymore to get my endorphins. And I remember being in the medical, like in his office, and I just was blinking at him with my like shoulders hunched over, barely able to like stand or walk. And I'm like, you want me to run right now? Like, are you out of your mind? So there was a lot of that for it took me a long time to get a diagnosis. For the first 2 years, I kept going to different doctors, naturopaths, and everyone just told me, you're just depressed, like this is really common of depression. You can't get out of bed. And I'm like, I'm sad because my life is falling apart, but I know that this is not the root.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
what was the diagnosis that you got?
Extreme anxiety and depression.
Wow. And
That's what they
because I got the same but not depression, but I got told it was like anxiety, health anxiety, they said, and I got put on antidepressants.
Yeah,
Um,
they did that to me too. And I took them for a couple years and
wow, a couple of years. That's crazy. I did it for 2 months, and then I was like, these aren't nothing's happening, so this is just ridiculous. two
but it
years,
starts it
crazy.
starts to get in your head a little bit, right? It's like, well, they're telling me nothing's wrong. I feel so wrong. Like maybe you start to doubt yourself a little bit. And you're
Oh
like, I'm
yeah,
willing to try. Maybe I am depressed. Maybe this is depression.
yeah, yeah. Oh God, it's just it's like I try. I sometimes I used to get like pretty angry about it, and then I realized although there are some doctors with terrible bedside manners, a lot of them do really want to help. It's just a systemic problem. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, oh God, and so
And it's just so limited. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, yeah, no, definitely. Well, and so you got these diagnoses. You were taking antidepressants. I guess because you had these diagnoses, were you telling other people that as well? So they thought that was the issue.
Um, no, I still kind of went with the burnout story
Okay, okay.
because that resonated more with me. And I'm like, I know, like I've always been, up until that point, I had been a bit of an anxious person.
Mhm.
Right. So I was like, yeah, like I have had kind of some anxiety, but I went with the burnout story. And the first 2 years, it was kind of interesting because I collapsed and I was completely disabled. And then, like 3 or 4 months in, I got a little better. Right.
Yeah,
I got a little better. And then within like 2 to 3 weeks, I got significantly better. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm over my burnout. And then I tried to go back to school for about a week and then I collapsed again.
yeah.
And it was just teetering in and out and in and out. Whenever I tried to do anything or return to normal life, my body was just like, nope, shut down, shut down, shut down.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Your body's just like, no, this is what got you here in the first place. Like, don't do that again. You need to go a different path. You haven't learned your lesson, or that's how I see it. Because
Yeah.
I feel like people want their old life back, but actually their old life is what got them there in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And at the time, I had so much resistance. I was like, I just want this to go away so I can continue on, this path I think I should continue on. But really, in hindsight, and it was such a blessing because it made me reevaluate all the ways I was out of alignment with myself, all the ways I was living in constant stress, putting all this pressure on myself, living for other people, refusing to say no. And like I resisted that. I resisted that introspection and that revamp for years, for like the first 2 to 3 years. I was like, I just want this to go away. I was looking for external answers so I could just go back to doing what actually made me sick. And now in hindsight, I'm like, that makes no sense. But in the moment, you just have how it is.
You're looking for, I mean, I did it for a lot longer than that. You're looking for a pill, you're looking for a diet, you're looking for a treatment or something that's gonna, because you do hear these stories, right, where people go and do these crazy treatments for Lyme disease or for whatever, and they get better. So you're like, okay, well, this will work for me. Whereas there's something else going on, which I'm sure you'll get into. When did you ever get a diagnosis of, okay, it was something? Yeah, did you ever get like a proper diagnosis from a doctor that like a chronic illness diagnosis? And if so, when did that happen?
That happened, I think, 2 years in when I was doing research on the internet and I came across the term chronic fatigue syndrome.
Uh,
Right. And I was like, whoa, this sounds exactly what I have, like exactly like what I have. And I brought it to my doctor and he's like, oh, yeah, yeah, I guess, yeah, I'd say you have that. And I'm just like, like
God.
I had to bring it to his attention. And then he said, there's this clinic for women in the city that supports women with this condition. There's a 2-year waiting list. I'll put you on that. And I'm like, okay. And going back to what you said about, we're just so indoctrinated to think you're sick and you go to the doctor and to reach for that external resource, whether in a pill or a surgery or a man or a man or a woman in a white coat. And in hindsight, I can see the fact that there was no external help to be given was actually my biggest blessing, because it made me say, okay, like to go within and say, I have to figure this out.
Yeah. But that takes a lot of, I don't know, insight to realize that it is on you. It took a long time for me to take the responsibility myself, because I think what people tend to do, and I always ask people this when they get that diagnosis, when someone says, you have chronic fatigue, or someone says you have Lyme disease, it can be a relief in the first instance, but then it just sends you down a whole other rabbit hole where you're clinging to that. That becomes your identity, but also you look for specific tips and techniques to recover from that particular diagnoses, when really you should be, in my opinion anyway, you should be doing what you're talking about and actually just fixing yourself, not fixing yourself, but looking at yourself from a holistic point of view. And it's because there's a whole, I don't know, you deal with so many clients, right? How many people come to you and say they've got like a laundry list of diagnoses? Is that
Yeah.
normal?
Yeah. Very normal. This is wrong. And this is wrong. And this is wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so how did you get to the point where, because you heard chronic fatigue, surely you then were Googling, how do I get better for chronic
But
fatigue?
yeah, well, you're right about how originally when I got the label, there was this sigh of relief. I'm like, oh, I finally know what's wrong with me. And then it's like, wait, what do you mean you can't do anything for me?
Yeah.
Right? Like, doctor, what do you mean you can't fix this? What do you mean there's a 2-year wait list? And then even then it'll just be symptom management. Like, I'm 21, like I have to learn to live with this. And he's like, yeah, some people develop, get worse and you may need a wheelchair down the line. And I just like, like my world was literally collapsing. Everything was crumbling. And I was just like, this can't be my life. I'm so young. Like, how is this happening?
How because I've now done so many of these episodes, right? And I also see so many comments and stuff on YouTube. It's interesting to look at people's different like their psychological state. How much do you think that kind of messaging at that point like affected you? Because I feel for me, those kinds of messages where it was like pretty clear that they said I had to live with it, I think that in itself set me back like quite a long time because I trusted their opinion so much. What's your opinion on that?
There was always a part of me that never believed it. And I think this is because of my own upbringing. My parents were really into natural medicine, they didn't really go by the Western typical practice. So I had already learned, not to necessarily trust everything that's said or told to me, and that there are alternative routes. So there was always a part of me that was like, no way that this is going to be my life.
That my parents are literally the opposite. They had a family doctor, and they still to this day they trust every single thing they say. So yeah, that's a real like Yeah, blessing that you had that. And I didn't even realize there was alternative ways of like treating things. That's amazing. So
Yeah, that definitely, I think, helped move me forward.
yeah, definitely. And so yeah, what could you take us through the next part then? So chronologically,
Then came then came just this like plethora of research. Like it was hard to function cognitively, right? I could barely watch TV, screens irritated me. I could, at my worst, I'd have these really severe crashes where I could barely speak for more than 5 minutes. Like, but anytime I was coherent, I'd go on the internet and just search. I'd research. My mom also was constantly looking up things. So we went to a naturopath. We went to an acupuncturist. I did neurofeedback. I did just tried all these things, right? Like a nutrition program, supplements. We were just constantly searching for things and nothing was really working. And
yeah,
that was for like the first like 4 years, just trying all these different treatments and not having anything work. And like I'd get a little bit better and then I'd crash again. I get a little bit better and then I'd crash. And I felt so stuck and frustrated because I couldn't figure it out.
yeah. And was that based? Had you, because you talked about you always believed that there was something different. There was always a way to kind of maybe get you better. Did you always have that deep down belief that you would recover, and that was there, or was that something you really had to kind of like build over time?
I'd say it was always there within me. I always knew I'm going to overcome this, but I did have moments of like severe defeat where I was just like, I don't know if I can do this. And they wouldn't last very long, maybe an afternoon, but I was just like, oh my God, like I did have those moments where I questioned if I can do this, but at my core, I always knew I was like, no, I'm going to overcome this. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care what I have to do. Like
Yeah,
I refuse to let this be my life.
yeah, God, yeah. And throughout your 20s. Uh,
Yeah. How old were you when it hit you?
so it first started for me when I was in like my early 20s. However, it was I then, similar to what you said, like in your teens, like I had like symptoms on and off throughout my 20s, but I was always told I was fine. And I lived a very extreme life of working like 12, 13-hour days in the city in London, but then I was going out till 3, 4 in the morning, and
Just go, go, go. Yeah.
barely sleeping, playing a lot of sport, like pushing myself, going to the gym, pushing myself in every area of my life. And then when I was 28, it just, it finally, it was the straw that broke the camel's back. I was on like a holiday with some friends, partying again. And then just from that point, life was never the same. Just did every symptom under the sun, kind of,
Just
24/7.
hit
So
you.
yeah,
I feel like chronic illness kind of like it'll at first it'll give you like a little like tap and it'll say,
yeah,
hey, hello. And then when you don't listen, it'll start like shaking you, and then all of a
I
sudden
needed
it
a
like
slap.
yeah, it just slaps you.
Yeah, I needed a big old slap a number of times.
Yeah, you and me both. You and me both.
Yeah. So 4 years in, and I think this is probably what, I don't know. Yeah, the route I see a lot of people going, and what I did, traditional medicine. Okay, that's not helping me. Alternative medicine, supplements, acupuncture, massage, all of these things, but they're still like external stuff. And quite often, as you say, I think there's a bit of help, but it doesn't get you like completely there. I think I've heard of some people like fully recovering through nutrition, which is like amazing when people do. But I also feel like those, I don't know about you, those stories kind of gave me false hope, because I would like go gluten free and I'd be like, okay, well, this is it. Gluten's the one, or no, dairy's the one, or I'm going to be fully vegan. And I think they gave me a lot of false hope. And what it made me do is I call it like shiny object syndrome. I would just chase the next shiny object. Did it feel like that with you? And did you feel like let down when it like deflated a bit when it didn't work?
Absolutely. So one of the things I did when I got really low and felt kind of hopeless, is I would look at recovery stories. I don't know if you know Dan Newfer.
Yes, yeah. He's been on the show.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I would
Okay.
watch his YouTube channel and I would just watch all these testimonials of how people recovered. And I remember one woman recovered with Ayurvedic medicine. And um, so I did try things that, that I heard like that, like nutrition. And actually, my first introduction to changing my health through nutrition was I found medical medium,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, I found medical medium and it did give me some hope because I heard his testimonials of people who, had chronic fatigue syndrome, couldn't get out of bed. And then a year from now, they're hiking. And I'm like, oh, I'll just change my diet. And then a year from now, I'll be functional. And I did see improvements with the diet. And, for those who know my story and my page, they do know that detoxification was a big part of my healing and I believe in it. But it didn't get me functional. It was the first thing that I really saw improvements with, but I was still severely limited in what I could do. And I did feel kind of let down because I was like, what's the differentiating factor? Why could this person eliminate gluten and all these no foods and they heal and I don't? What am I doing wrong? Like, and in those moments, I was like, crap, like, is this just not going to work for me?
Yeah. And did you have that? I think the one uh limiting belief that I've had to like really work on, and I think I'm pretty much there with like it being gone, is that there's something quite different about me that means that I won't recover or that it's going to take me.
I'm special and not in the way you want kind
Yeah,
of syndrome.
yeah. I'm special and not in a good way.
Yeah.
um, yeah. Did you have any of that feeling because you were looking at all these other stories and they were recovering and you weren't when you tried the same thing? Did you have any of that kind of like doubt in that way?
Yeah, I did oscillate. I did have periods where I was just like, maybe there's something just different with me, and this is why it doesn't work. But then I got introduced to Ashok Gupta. I know you've interviewed him.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I came across the Gupta program online, and it made so much sense to me that this was due to a dysregulation in the nervous system and being chronically dysregulated for the majority of my life. Um, just being kind of stressed and anxious and having these patterns, and I was like, oh, I just have to rewire my brain. Right. So that was the first time where it really clicked for me. And I was like, this makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, so his was the first program where it did make sense for me. I think I kind of again had to be kind of like slapped around the face with it quite a few times because I think it's like I believed in the mind body connection, but I was like there has to be something else as well. There has to be something. I didn't think that would be the biggest thing. Um, did it take when you say clicked? Were you then doing his program or what? Like how?
Yeah. So by clicked, I meant it was the first thing that I really heard, like, this is the root cause of your problems that made sense to me. You know, when on a visceral feeling, something just lands and you're like, this feels right.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's the kind of response I had to his program and just his philosophy. Because when I found medical medium, I was like, okay, but I was like, this doesn't really make sense to me that this is just because EBV is perpetually attacking my nerves. Like, right?
He says
Like
EBV for everything.
everything.
Everything. Yeah, I
Yeah.
kind of yeah. I think he's doing some good, but I think he's misleading a lot of people as well. Yeah. Maybe I'm saying that because I'm a little bit bitter. I did like a month just eating raw food, raw like fruit and vegetables, and I thought I was going to feel amazing, and I just did not.
Yeah.
Because that's
Yeah.
what.
The letdown on that.
Yeah. Sorry. So did you actually do his program then? The
For
good.
Gupta?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did
Yeah.
do his program. And it was the thing that helped me the most in my recovery up until that point, and I was seeing improvements. But again, I was still kind of coming up against a block. I'd get a little bit better and then I digress. I think my problem with it was I I just wanted to rewire the thoughts without actually making any changes to my character.
Okay. Okay.
You know, like
Talk to me about that.
because with for those who don't know, like Ashok's program is basically like you have to rewire your nervous system to a sense of safety, right? So whenever you notice a symptom or have scary thoughts, like this looping cycle of you feel a symptom and then you have fear, right? And then fear creates more symptoms and you kind of get stuck in this loop where you're just running on adrenaline and the body can't heal. So I would use his program to interrupt that cycle and restore, a sense of calmness to my nervous system. But then whenever I felt a little bit better, I go back to pushing. I go back to, being my go overachiever self I wasn't connected with really what was driving me. I was still living in a constant state of stress, trying to prove my worth.
Okay.
Right. So I could do his program, but I wasn't really getting to the core of what made me sick and what was driving these patterns and these behaviors. So that's why I think his program worked for me, but only to a certain extent.
Do you think the first part of like the mind body stuff is like actually, yeah, accepting that is the problem, and then it's actually then getting down on a more detailed level of what is the actual problem for you? Is that what it was for you? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Getting really in touch with like myself and what drives me and, what's causing me stress. And basically just like, how am I living out of alignment with myself? How can I return to being true to myself with my words, with my actions, with how I choose to live? But now when I look back on my experience with chronic illness, I do really see it as this spiritual lesson experience of it had to shake me. It had to say, you are so out of alignment with who you truly are. You're living for other people, right? You're not honoring yourself. Like you need to start listening. I really feel like that was the purpose of it for me.
And were you spiritual at the way you talk? It seems like maybe you were quite spiritual before anyway, but this brought more of it out, or was that side of you kind of didn't come out until you'd been through this process?
Yeah, I'd say I had this like blend of spiritualism and pragmatism because my mom was quite spiritual, but my dad's quite pragmatic. So I really, growing up, I had that combination. So yeah, I would say I was spiritual before, but when I got introduced to Ashok's work and the nervous system work, it also made sense to me on a pragmatic level that my nervous system was just dysregulated and sending these constant threat signals to my brain, and I had to rewire my brain. And that really has been at the core of my healing. I just found other strategies that work better than the Gupta program for me.
Okay. So you've done the Gupta program, it makes sense. It's not quite working. What do you do? What do you do next?
Then I also experimented a little bit with DNRS.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, brain rewiring again. And that helped too, but I felt it was also a bit more surface level because you rewire the thoughts in the moment, right? And I still wasn't really getting to the core. And then I found a therapy called Faster EFT, Eutaptics. Yeah, and it just
I've had him on the Robert Smith.
Oh, Robert Gene Smith,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I've had him on the. I've had him and Annie Hopper on like recently. So yeah, he's great.
Yeah, I really like his work. And I remember I had hit an all-time low. It was 4 years in. I had done the Gupta program. I had done part of DNRS, but I just had crashed really bad again. Right. And I was like, this stuff makes sense. The nervous system piece makes sense. But again, I was feeling hopeless and defeated. And when I did that, I would kind of go into search mode on the internet.
Yeah.
And then I found Faster EFT and I found a woman named Ilka Oster and I started working with her. And we had one session and I had not washed my hair for 6 weeks because I had really like thick, long hair and I couldn't really lift my arms up and it was hard for me to bathe. And I was just so exhausted and depleted, bedbound. And right after that session with her, I washed my own hair.
Wow.
And it was still, it was a feat. It was still hard for me to do. And I was exhausted afterwards and I had to go right back to bed. But I was like, whoa, like I noticed that shift. And then I started booking more sessions with her and a lot of ups and downs. But I was like, whoa, there's something to this. There's a nervous system piece, but also that's when it really clicked for me. This is my belief that the physical body is a manifestation of the unconscious mind. All right. And then I went into this rabbit hole of research and understanding. Have you heard of something called the ACE study?
No, I haven't. No.
It's talking about adverse childhood experiences, and it's just like this really, yeah,
Is
it's
that the
this.
one where you there's they talk about like is it 10 markers or something? Or
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, okay. And if you have, even if you have one of them, it's bad. But if you have multiple of them, then it most likely can lead to chronic illness. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. This is really big scientific study that like it proves very clearly that if you have certain stressors in childhood, and they can vary from, physical abuse, but even having like a parent who's mentally ill or stressed, then it kind of does something to your body and your genes that you're more likely to develop chronic illness as an adult. And my family history, my parents were very supportive, but I came from a family with a lot of trauma, war trauma, famine, right? And that kind of consciousness seeped in, and there was a lot of fear,
Mhm.
right? A lot of helicopter parenting, a lot of fear. And I think that put me in a state of stress from a very young age. Emotional unavailability as well from certain parents and family members. And it just really clicked for me. It's like, whoa, I've been in a perpetual state of stress since I was a kid, and my body just can't do it anymore. This is what's happening. So I started to process those childhood experiences. I started to rewire my nervous system using Faster EFT. And it took time. It took time, but I kept working with my coach. And that's really what I'd say got me better.
And because I actually did a session with Robert Smith, and it was really interesting. A lot of it was going back and trying to reframe certain things that I probably thought were quite insignificant, that were for me at that time at such a young age were actually quite significant, and the impact that could have had on me. Even though right now as an adult I don't see it as a big thing, like back then that could have left a bit of an imprint. Is that what you were working on? Things that, like, yeah, that maybe had seemed a little bit insignificant, but then really digging into how you might have felt at that time and how that has impacted you?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the first things I said to my coach when I got on the call with her is I was like, listen, I know the link between childhood trauma and chronic illness. I don't have any childhood trauma. I just don't know what else to do. Okay. That's what I said to her. I'm like, I don't know what else to do. I'm at like the end, like I don't know what else to do. And at that point I was quite suicidal because it did kind of, I did hit points where like I always had that core that I was going to be okay, but I did hit moments where I got really low and I'm like, maybe I can't do this. So yeah, when I said that to her, she's like, okay, let's explore some of these patterns, right? And she asked me what was happening at the time you got sick. And I was like, well, I was overworking myself. I refused to stop. I was going. I was, going to business school to try and please certain people and parents. And we really dove into that. Like, why were you doing that? Where do these patterns come from? Right. And I think that's what really got to the core of me understanding why I got ill and how I got ill and how to really change those patterns and start showing up for myself and in my life in a different way. And it can sound cliche, but really loving myself, honoring myself, knowing I am worthy, and not having life be about how can I prove my worth, but just like how can I be in resonance with myself? How can I live an inspired life?
And how many sessions did you do before you were like, well, actually,
Ooh.
I guess actually the fact that because what I've always felt was throughout like my journeys, like I always needed a little bit of evidence that something was improving. And I guess you got that on your first session, right? The fact that you could wash your head, there's like that in itself is like, okay, I believe in this, I trust in it. My nervous system can trust this. Like and so yeah, did you notice a little bit of change every single session? And if so, like how many sessions did it take and how long did it take until you were like you made like big improvements?
Yeah, so I definitely noticed after that first session that slight shift. And then after every single session with her, I did feel an improvement. I did feel better. And I also did the work on myself. This is a tool you can use on yourself. And I use it on my clients, but I also really encourage them to work on themselves in between. And it wasn't until probably a year later that I felt like exceptionally more functional, but like took 2 years of doing this work where I really was feeling like I had broken free and was living more of my life. So it took some time for sure. And there was a lot of ups and downs. And I would come back to my coach saying, this isn't working and this and that. And she would, say, okay, what in your subconscious mind is creating this? What's keeping you in a state of stress? We'd unravel more patterns. I felt better and better and better. And that's why, I do hold this belief that the body is a representation of the unconscious mind. And I think if there's something malfunctioning in the body, it always starts at an emotional, energetic level first. And I really went off that premise to get myself well.
You strike me as someone who, because you said you went into full research mode. You're like someone who, if you go at something, you're going to go at it like, 100%.
I struggle with balance a little bit sometimes.
Yeah, me too. But with that comes like perfectionism and, okay, well, I need to do everything completely right, or it's not going to be right. Because I realized that about myself in my approach to getting better as well. And it was only actually the biggest, and I'm still not like where I need to be at all, but like the biggest improvements I've made was actually when I let go of a lot of that need to be perfect in my approach and to do everything completely perfect and actually let myself do things. I've actually got a coffee right next to me, which I've talked about on the podcast. I didn't drink coffee in 2 years. And then I drink coffee now, but it's important I don't drink 7 coffees in a day. But did you have that as well? And is that something you needed to work through? Could you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I noticed that pattern within myself. And I noticed the more I pushed and tried to be perfect, the more symptoms I had. And my coach called me out on this. She's like, Alex, you are using the same approach to your healing as, that got you sick. She's like, you can't do that. Right. And even my coach would kind of mirror what my parents said, like, take a break, do a little less.
Yeah.
And then we unraveled the pattern of, why do you need to be perfect? Right? Where did you learn this? This is a conditioned response. How did you get this in your consciousness that you need to be perfect in order to be worthy or be loved or whatever? And that went back to childhood again. So that was a big part of my healing and unraveling where that pattern came from.
Mm.
And then just cutting it out, like giving myself a break.
Yeah, because I think I got a lot of that belief as well from, I'd work with a new practitioner, or I'd maybe even interview someone, or I'd watch a recovery story, and they'd done all of these like amazing things, but there was so many of them. And I think maybe it does, I don't know, made me think something about myself as just like, I don't think that's possible for me. Like I can't do all of those things perfectly, but unless I try to do them all perfectly, I'm not going to get better. And then I think there's maybe some guilt with that as well. Is that a pattern you see with your clients? Is that a pattern you were seeing with yourself?
Yeah, that's the pattern I see with a lot of my clients. I have to do this perfectly, right? Like I have to wake up and I have this healing routine. I have to do an enema and dry skin brush, and I have to do this. And then I have to do like meditate. And I like stopped them. I had to stop myself too. And I had to say, what's your intention behind doing this? Why are you doing this? Well, to relax my nervous system and get better and heal. And I'm like, it's actually doing the contrary.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, definitely. I have you ever looked into primal trust with?
Yeah, Dr. Kathleen King.
Yeah,
I like her a lot.
Yeah. I didn't even complete her course, but just I really kind of vibe with everything she talks about, just because she just constantly talks about the need to not be perfect, but also she's like, if there's just one thing that you can do is just find something in your day that brings you joy. And I was like, oh my God, I've gone years without having things in my day that bring me joy. Like that's crazy to think that. And whereas dry brushing, and hours of doing rounds with brain retraining, like that doesn't bring me joy.
I think that was my problem with brain retraining too. It started to feel like a chore and I was almost dreading it, but I loved Faster EFT. There was something about it that I was so passionate about, and I loved the process, and I really enjoyed it. Like I looked forward to my sessions with my coach, right? There was this passion driving my interest in it. And I think I always knew that just even beyond myself, this is why I teach my clients now. It's the technique I use with my clients. So I think that's another reason this helped me get better, because I was actually enjoying the process. Faster EFT really helped me reframe symptoms, right? So instead of, oh my God, I have more symptoms, I'm never going to heal. It's like, okay, what's my body trying to tell me, right? Where am I out of alignment? It was always my cue that I was out of alignment, or I was subscribing to a subconscious program that no longer served me. It made me ask deeper questions and reflect instead of what's wrong with me. It's like, how can I live more in alignment with myself?
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I think if you can, and even that, just asking that question to yourself would calm your nervous system down compared to the previous response of, oh,
Yeah.
what the fuck's going on?
Because you're checking in and you're like almost like a friend or a child. It's like, hey, how you doing?
Yeah,
Like, are you okay? And I think so many of us with chronic illness, we don't check in with ourselves, and then we get so out of sync, symptoms show up, right? So it's about tuning inward and be like, you okay? Like, what do you need?
that's such an interesting way to think about it, because if it was your friend or a family member, you wouldn't be going, oh my God, what's going on with you? Are you ever going to get better? You wouldn't be like screaming this at them. You would be
Yeah.
nurturing, you'd be calming. And that's exactly what you're saying, right? You're doing that to yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Taking the pressure off and just checking in. And something I noticed with myself, and this common theme I notice with pretty much all my clients who have chronic illness, is they have this belief that they're not loved for who they truly are. Right. And usually it comes from childhood. Like they had to act a certain way, they had to please a parent, they weren't accepted for who they fully were. And that creates dysregulation in the nervous system from the start, because they always have to be on guard. They have to be someone they're not.
Yeah, definitely. God, yeah. This is like a session in itself.
Well, it's yeah, it's so deep and it's so true. It's like, really, I think to feel safe, we all just need to feel like we're loved for who we are and that we can be ourselves, right?
Yeah. And with something I was going to ask is that I was, I am exactly the same. The reason why I didn't uh persist with brain retraining was because I I just found I've got this real immature side of me that feels like I'm in school, and I to do these things every
Well, you
morning.
like to play, and that can be
Yeah,
kind of boring.
exactly. It was so boring, but also it really I didn't. I think some people are able to tap into it really easily, and therefore they can see results quicker, and then it's easy. It's easy to have the motivation to do it. But I did it solidly for quite a long time. Just yeah, and then I've actually been using exercise as a way for me to like retrain my brain, and that's working definitely to a point, whilst also using breath work, etc., etc. With the technique you talk about, and I guess we won't go into specifically what it is, but is it something that you use throughout the day as things come up, and like how does it compare to brain retraining?
Yeah, it does. You can use it as things come up. You can have project tapping where a client will come to me and say, hey, I have this symptom. And we kind of go digging and investigate about what it's rooted in. But also you can use the technique right in the moment. Like I have a symptom, I don't feel well, and you can use it right in the moment. So it's very adaptable.
It's
Yeah.
tapping. Yeah, sorry, that's what. Yeah, you're tapping. I've got. Yeah,
Well, yeah, they have to change the name because faster EFT is really different from traditional EFT. It's also a form of brain rewiring,
yes,
because traditional EFT is based on the premise that all your issues are a result of blocked energy,
right.
right? Versus faster EFT doesn't abide by that. Faster EFT, the philosophy is you have a problem and your subconscious mind is referring to something from your past to create this.
And when you're tapping, are you because let's say a symptom comes up and you're tapping, because this is I guess this is the thing that kind of messed with my head a little bit was do you keep going until the symptom's gone away, and if the symptom doesn't go away, then because that as well was just a bit like, oh God, the symptom's not going away, so this isn't working, and that's a bit of a head fuck as well. Sorry to
Mhm.
swear.
Yeah, can you swear on your show? I like to swear. I just wasn't sure.
Oh no, yeah, I know. I swear to. I always think, people listening to this, I swear a bit too much, but like, so I try to like stop it a little bit.
Okay, I love to swear. I just wasn't sure if that's what you do on here. So
Oh yeah, definitely for sure. Well, what's I'm not getting this isn't a call. I'm not getting paid for this or any of that, so
yeah.
I can swear. I can swear as much as I want. Anyway, sorry. What was I saying? Yeah, tapping to get the symptom to go away almost.
Hmm.
Yeah. Do you tap until the symptom goes away? Is that like because it almost feels like that in itself creates anxiety.
Right. Yeah. I notice the approach here to healing and even using this technique is important because if you're just like, I just need to go like this to go away, and people are just tapping and they're like, why isn't it going away? Right. Rather than approaching it with a curiosity and openness.
Yeah.
Right. So um when clients come to me with a symptom, I have like a series of questions and we do some digging and some investigation about what it could be linked to. And it's different for every client, which is interesting. Like, people can have the same diagnosis, but it's rooted in totally two different things. Um, yeah, did that answer your
Yeah,
question?
yeah, yeah, no, definitely, definitely. Anyway, so jump back into your story. So you said it was kind of like 2 years until like things really, which I think is a really
4 years. It took 4 years of trial and error before I found Faster EFT and it really started moving the needle. And then it took another 2 years for me to be like, oh, I'm exceptionally more functional.
yeah, yeah. Sorry, I meant from when you were working with EFT,
Oh yeah.
Faster EFT, and I think the thing I like, obviously, I prefer people to get better straight away. That's amazing. But I think it's just a lot more relatable to hear someone where it takes time. And I think I've had a few messages to me, when I've talked about, it's taking me quite a lot of time. And I think I've always found it more relatable when someone says, it took time, it wasn't easy. I had to keep going. And yeah, so I think that's just it's really relatable and inspiring to hear that.
That's why I always say to my clients too. I said, always be open to the possibility that things can shift very quickly for you. There are people who heal within a matter of weeks after being sick for decades, right? I've met people who've used Faster EFT to heal 20 years of chronic illness in 3 weeks,
Wow.
right? I said, be open to that possibility. And if you're like someone like me, like it can take time and persistence, like you need to persist. Persistence is the key, right? And I do share really authentically with my clients. It was 2 years of lots and ups and downs, progression, and knowing I'm moving in the right direction. But it wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't like linear.
How much of your so actually before I ask this question, at the end of that 2 years, as it were you like better? Were you did you still have little things to work on? And I guess I don't like saying like fully recovered because I think some people are always working on little things and they'll come out of alignment and then they'll have symptoms come up, but were you at a point where you were like, okay, well, you're traveling right now, right? So like were you at a point where you were like, okay, I can work, I can travel, or if
I
not, how long did that take?
I was very cautious because I had, been through the push and crash cycle so much and going up and down and up and down. So at that point, I was getting a lot better and I was able to do a lot more, but I was still really cautious. Like I remember, I think 2.5 years after finding Faster EFT, or about 3 years, my friend invited me out to Maui, right? And I remember having some hesitation. I'm like, I don't know, I'm a lot better, but I don't know if I'm well enough. So I was living a lot more, but I was still really cautious and I hadn't fully expanded. It wasn't until the last year that I really feel like I've started living my life again.
Wow. And how does that feel? How does that feel like compared to what you were doing? Do you have to like pinch yourself sometimes to when you compare what it was like?
Yeah, yeah. It's weird because I wonder, because I've done so much trauma work on it. I mean, you and I both know that chronic illness can be traumatic, incredibly traumatic, and I've done so much trauma work on it that it doesn't even feel like I'm sitting here telling you this recap and it doesn't even feel like me anymore. I
Wow.
feel so detached from it. It's just like I'm telling a story about someone. So I'm super grateful to be where I'm at, and I'm traveling. I run my own business. Like my life is very big
Yeah.
in a beautiful way. So I'm exceptionally grateful, and I don't feel a huge attachment anymore to my chronic illness story.
what I like about what you're doing, and it's what I try to do as well, is that there's not having fear play into your decision making and what you're doing, because I know people with chronic illness, when you hear of travel, they're like, oh God, I can't go there. What about if I get a parasite? What, I can't go there. What about, I'm actually, the reason why I'm quite like sneezy and stuff at the moment, because I'm living in a place that's got loads of mold, and that in itself is like it's like triggering mentally for me. Like and there's a lot of mold there's a lot of mold in like in Bali in general, but also in tropical places. But what I've accepted is that I probably will get a parasite. I probably will, be around mold, but that's life. And my system, my nervous system, my body has to be robust enough to deal with that. And I should. And actually, if I was stuck back in England in a cold, rainy, dark country, restricting myself, that would be even worse. Yeah. Does that resonate?
It does. Yeah, it really does. And I think that's part of the mental patterning and the stress conditioning that can keep people stuck in chronic illness, right? And I
Yeah.
guess that's part of the brain rewiring. But to me, when clients come to me and they say, I'm scared, I can't travel because of this and this and this, I'm like, this is the same pattern that got you sick, living in fear.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah.
I think it's honestly very hard to get ill if you are living at peace with yourself and in alignment with who you truly are. I think it's really hard to get ill. So I'm like, you're running the fear program. Where is this coming from? Right. And this is shining a light on these patterns that you've been running for a long time. Let's unravel them. Let's decondition them. Let's get you living more at peace with yourself. And then we see what happens to your body. Then we see how your body responds.
Yeah. No, it's a really good way to think about things, particularly when you're traveling. So on that first trip when you went to Maui, did you have any instances where your symptoms came up, or things that made you feel a bit scared? Did you have to get over any of this stuff?
Yeah, I definitely did. I moved to a new place here and there was mold, right? And I had some symptoms come up and I got scared and I thought I was gonna have to go home. So I think it's just another testament that my story has not been linear, right? I've had ups and downs and it's been a continual progression, but there have been moments where I'm like, shit, this is hard or this is back, what's happening? But I've always used it as an opportunity to look deeper within myself and say, I have to make an adjustment, right? This isn't a regression. This is an opportunity to make an adjustment and, get even more aligned to up level even more.
How much of your recovery has been, and the state you're in now, has been due to the work you've done, like brain, like nervous system regulation, and also like lifestyle changes? And as a like, if you had to put a percentage on it, like how, I know that's
I
probably.
would attribute I would attribute like 80% of it to faster EFT and subconscious reprogramming and the nervous system work. It's all kind of the same thing. But yeah, I'd attribute like 80% of my recovery to that and the other 20% to like diet.
Okay, diet, interesting. I feel like for me, the a huge piece of the puzzle that has to be like worked on and fixed, in addition to the nervous system regulation, is sleep. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
I'm a terrible sleeper, and but I've been conditioned to be a terrible sleeper through what I did in my 20s, and then also, yeah, I think probably stuff that has happened in my childhood with regards to sleep. And it's something I ignored for like quite a long time. I'm only asking this because I'm just really interested. I speak to some people who they always slept quite well, and then they just had chronic illness. But yeah, for you, was sleep something you had to work on?
No, sleep for me was genuinely pretty good. I would sleep a lot. The only time I had a year or two where I did struggle with sleep because when I tried to get off the antidepressants,
Yeah,
um, I started getting brain zaps and like my brain just freaked out. And after that, I couldn't really sleep. I was maybe sleeping, just a couple hours a night for several months. And it took about a year to normalize after I got off the antidepressant. So there was that, but genuinely my sleep was pretty good. And I noticed the more I used faster EFT to regulate my nervous system and let go of my stress patterns, the better I slept.
yeah. Interesting. You're one of those annoying people that sleeps really well. Uh, uh, No, I'll get there. No, I just think it's. I always say to people on the podcast whenever I'm talking about it, it's like I have to always be really honest with myself, and before I'm like going and trying some weird thing over the other side of the world. Am I sleeping well? Am I eating well? Am I taking care of my nervous system? Am I breathing right? And if I'm not doing those four things like as a baseline, I shouldn't go and start trying some weird supplement that might help.
Yeah, the basics, right? Well,
Yeah,
to me, even Faster EFT helped me with that because I had a major program of neglecting myself and not caring for myself, right? So when I was able to go and address with my coach what this is rooted in, I was better able to show up for myself. I was better able to have consistent sleep, eat well, take good care of myself.
yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, I was doing it yesterday. I'm trying to make sure like sunlight is like a big. It's the reason why I moved out here, right? Like I need to get sunlight, so I get it first thing in the morning. But then what I've tended to do is that I'm in this co-working space here in Bali, and I can see the sun outside, and yet I'm indoors working, and I'm like, I need to go and have a walk in the middle of the day so I can get this sunlight. And I just didn't do it all day because I had so much work to do, and I know that would have affected my sleep. I know it would have affected. So,
Right.
and that's just a pattern of me like neglecting what's actually important to me. And yeah, it's weird that I still do it and I can't help myself from still doing it.
But what a beautiful thing. That sounds so normal and healthy to me in the sense, not that you do it, but it's kind of like life, right? Like healthy people, they fall off their routine and they're like, well, I worked a little too much, and I kind of notice I'm out of balance. And then you just rebalance and you're okay. I think it's a part of just living a healthy life and a busy life.
Yeah, well, just I think whenever I start to like say, oh, that was bad or what, the fact that I have an awareness of it is so much more than how I used to be, but also probably so much more than a lot of high percentage of the population of the world that work in a cubicle for God knows how many hours. So yeah, I think I've got to thank.
Cubicle life. Like that's another blessing of, chronic illness for me and overcoming it. I really think if I had never gone ill, I would be working in a cubicle as a marketing executive. Like I would have lived a very different life.
100%. I would be in London. I'd be earning a lot of money, but miserable because it's like that's what London is. Like it was, you tried to earn as much money as you could, but you lived a very unhealthy life. That's actually what I was going to ask you about because I always try to reframe whenever I'm feeling bad. I always think about it and try to think about it as much as I can, like how much different is my life as a result, but how much better is my life as a result of what I've been through. And yeah, could you talk us through like, yeah, how is your life
Oh
different
my God.
as you sit in Maui, and how much?
Where do I even begin? I just have this sense of freedom. Like it's ironic how being so caged by my body and being so caged by chronic illness ultimately led me to finding the greatest freedom I've ever experienced. Right? I feel free to be myself. I run my own business. I decide my own schedule, my own hours. I can be in anywhere in the world because I work remotely. It's just like I have this openness to my life that I didn't even know was a possibility before I got sick.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I think you summed it up pretty well. And how has it changed your? We touched upon it before, like relationships, and I don't mean like romantic relationships, just in terms of like friends and people you know. I feel a lot of people tend to like lose friends through this, but then
Yeah.
also gain a lot of friends as well. So I guess that's life, right? But is that a process you've been through? The people back from home who are maybe living that cubicle life, who can't really relate to what you've been going through and to where you're at now?
Yeah, I would say my network is very different. I did have a different group of friends and I'm still in contact with them, but it's not the same. It's more, just like whenever I'm in town, we maybe touch base. But that's another one of the blessings of this illness, it got me, or overcoming this illness, it got me to get very intentional about what resonates with me and what doesn't.
Yeah.
Right. And that includes relationships. So the friendships in my life now, maybe they're less, I don't have as big of a network, but they feel more authentic and they feel more safe and aligned and just and fun and playful. And like I can just really be the real me, and I'm totally loved and accepted for it. So it got smaller, but it got like richer.
Yeah. Wow. And because you're traveling, you're going to meet more and more of those people
Yeah.
along the way.
Yeah, well, I was telling you before we hopped on the call that, traveling is great, but I feel like I'm ready to like grow some roots and build that network.
Yeah.
So I do feel like I'm getting to a point in my life now where I want to expand my network, but it's from a very conscious place. I know who I am, right? And attracting people who not necessarily have the same beliefs as me, but there's just this reciprocity of acceptance and fun and play and love.
Yeah. It's interesting you said like fun and play like a few times. And I think that's something that people lose as they get older. And as I said, yeah, I've got that immaturity, I think of me that just constantly wants to be out playing.
Well, I used to take life so seriously, like with healing too. And even before I got sick, I would take it so seriously. And getting back into my playful nature and making things lighter was a big part of my healing.
That's actually, yeah, because what I put my life on hold for a long time, and I was always like, it was always, oh, when I get better, when I do, and it was always like I can't enjoy my life now because I still have
Mm.
all this shit going on that I'm dealing with. Were you able to start when you were going through this process? At what point could you actually start enjoying your life and you didn't have it on hold? Were you able to start, yeah, doing things that you actually enjoyed doing and playing and having fun?
Yeah. At what point? I'd say a couple years ago is when I started expanding more into play, but it's still kind of a pattern I'm working on getting better at, right? Prioritizing play and fun in my life. And I feel like I'm at a good place with it now. Like I'm going dancing next week, right? And I take dance classes and um yeah, I really try to prioritize playfulness, whatever that means to me. And that changes from day to day, right? Sometimes it's playing with the dog, sometimes it's laughing with friends, sometimes it's going diving, like whatever feels fun, and realizing that's not a luxury. Like for a long time, I felt like that's not something I should prioritize because it's not to be valued. And I really realize when I'm having fun, I'm actually at my healthiest. I'm
Yeah,
most productive, right? When I'm having fun, when I'm feeling inspired, that's when I'm at my healthiest. And that's actually when I can be in service to others the best.
definitely. Cool. My final question to you is, I guess talking to yourself at the depths of chronic illness, the person that was, but then also talking to everyone who's listening to this who's probably at a similar point right now, which is why they're looking to get that, they're that you said you were looking at Dan's website, looking for recovery stories, looking for inspiration. What would you say to that person, like to give them hope, to get them to keep going, to get them to persist and keep moving forward?
That's a good question. I would say, as challenging as it is currently for you, this can be the best thing that ever happens to you. Let it strip and crumble all the old structures of your personality and life that don't align with who you truly are, and let yourself rebuild and get to know yourself deeply and get aligned with your true self. And you're going to, on the other side of this, you're going to be living a life that's so much better than you ever could have imagined, because you're going to know yourself better and you're going to be true to yourself and you're going to be making different decisions.
Awesome. You've summed that up very well. Thank you so much for. I think it's like Friday evening your time, so thank you so much for
My
spending
pleasure.
Friday evening. If people want to reach out to you, I know you're very active on Instagram. Is that the best way for them to get in contact with you? Like, how would they do
Yeah,
that?
they can follow me at Heal with Alex, and it's just one whole word, Heal with Alex, and they can DM me.
Awesome. And thank you so much for coming on, sharing your story. I'm so excited for this to get out there and for people to hear exactly what you've been through and where you're at now.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.